Hello, and welcome to the Scientific Enneagram podcast, where we dive into the intersection between the Enneagram and the sciences. I'm your host, Danielle. I'm a Type 9 engineer with a master's in psychology and not an expert in any specific science or even the Enneagram for that matter. Just a curious mind who loves trying to integrate different aspects of our world around us into something coherent and understandable. So thanks for coming along on this ride with me. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the history of psychology, where it came from, how long it's been around, what the different main modalities are, and then also how each of those do and don't overlap with the Enneagram. The Enneagram is hardly ever studied in the psychological research world. It's not never, and we'll dive into some of those studies in future episodes to see what they do and don't say. But there are some reasons that it's difficult to study the Enneagram, and we're going to cover those as we go along. That said, looking at it from a scientific perspective, psychology is a relatively new field of study. It's only about 150 years old, while Homo sapiens date back hundreds of thousands of years. So 150 years is just a blip on the radar. Over that time, we've progressed into focusing on different areas. And in the early years, in like the late 1800s, that focus area was essentially introspection. You might recognize names such as Edward Titchener or Wilhelm Wundt. They were the ones that were kind of the early pioneers of psychology and the study of psychology. Their preferred method of introspection really was all about reporting on the contents of your own mind. This is great because you're the owner of your mind. Nobody else can really get in there and tell you what you're thinking, tell you what you're experiencing. You're the keeper of the keys from that sense. So introspection is helpful to understand what's going on in somebody's head. Problem with introspection, though, is that it doesn't at all focus on the subconscious. Everything that's coming out of your mouth is only what you're consciously aware of. So while it worked for the day, there's a reason that it was kind of overridden by some of these other modalities that we'll talk about. Another issue with it is, you might have heard of the observer theory, is that whenever you observe something, you automatically change the outcome. Anybody who has kids knows this. If they're playing by themselves and you're watching on a monitor or something from afar, not an actual observer, they might be acting one way, and then as soon as you step in the room, their behavior shifts, even slightly. It's not like it gets better or worse. It's just different. If in your everyday life, if you were expected to vocalize every single thought that went through your head on a daily basis, your thoughts might be, I need to go to the grocery store, I need to pick up around the house, I need to work on that project for work, anything like that. That might be your actual thought processes. But the second that you start observing those thoughts and vocalizing them, your thoughts will inherently change. You're going to start hearing your voice out loud, and your thoughts are going to spin from, I need to go to the store, to, oh my gosh, my voice sounds like that. Oh, I'm probably bothering that other person who has to listen to me vocalizing all this. Oh, that's not feeling right in my mouth. I should probably call the dentist. Your thoughts will naturally change. That's the observer problem, and that's pretty inherent to introspection, which again makes it pretty unsustainable for long-term study or clinical use. In reaction to introspection, we kind of branched out into two different realms around the same time period, but very, very different. On the one side, you had psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis was almost the mirror image of introspection. It was still about what's going on inside, but instead of about your conscious mind, it was about your subconscious mind. You might recognize names from the psychoanalytic world like Carl Jung and Alfred Adler and Sigmund Freud, which Freud was his own person with his own ideas. Not all of them were that great, but some of them were, and he was definitely a pioneer, regardless of some of his specific thoughts. So in psychoanalysis, everything stems from the unconscious. The positives of that really makes you dig deeper into what's going on. It makes you be more critical and self-analytical of, why did I think that? What could have spurred that? What might have made me act that way that I'm not aware of? It just generally helps us be more critical thinkers about what's going on within us. But on the downside, it's unfalsifiable, meaning that you can't prove it wrong. If I tell you that oh, I really thought deep and I came to the conclusion that the reason I am what I am is because I failed this test in third grade. There's nothing you can do to tell me I'm wrong. That's my interpretation. There's no way to prove or disprove that. You just have to take what I say with a grain of salt. And that's part of the human experience. Humans are messy. We are not that easy to break apart. We're not the same. So it does make sense to have that kind of analysis. But when it comes to scientific research, psychoanalysis makes it very, very difficult, to almost impossible to do any sort of quantitative data. And then qualitative still begs the question of how deep did they actually dig? Did we actually get to the root cause? Did we actually get to the reason that they are the way they are? Or did they just go down the list and then they stopped at that failed test in third grade? It's hard to tell. So you might have picked up that both psychoanalysis and introspection are actually fairly aligned to the Enneagram and how it's managed. The Enneagram is very multifaceted. It's trying to understand what's going on at a deeper level, much more similar to psychoanalysis. The part where introspection comes into play is Enneagram tests, which any Enneagram coach worth their salt will tell you to stay far away unless you really need just a starting guide to get you going. But any Enneagram test you take is inherently introspective. It asks you a question and then you answer based on your own conscious awareness. You're not digging into your subconscious to see if that's actually what's going on or to find out more of the nuance that's driving your answer. You're just answering. Be careful with Enneagram tests. I will get off of that soapbox when I die. So introspection and psychoanalysis are somewhat tangential to the Enneagram, but as we've explained, they make it very difficult to study from a scientific perspective. Another modality that was explored around the same time as psychoanalysis was behaviorism. And this was the other side of the coin. We need to have data. We need it to be objective. We need it to be quantifiable and measurable. We needed it to be in controlled environments. They essentially were treating the mind and people as black boxes. And if you're not aware of what a black box is, coming from the engineering world, if you have a black box, you don't care at all what's inside of it. All you know is that if I plug something in on the input and send a signal, then I should be able to expect what's going to come out on the output. If I push the go button on this side, then it should send the go signal on the output. Who cares what's in the black box? That doesn't matter. The signal's going to go around, it's going to do its stuff, and it's going to push out something, but I don't care what's going on inside. That's kind of what behaviorism is all about. It's looking at what did I do and what was the reaction, and who cares what's going on in between. I think you can probably see why this is a problem because it does not at all address the impact that our mental states have on our behaviors. It's only if I do A, then B will happen. To anybody who's ever taken like a Myers-Briggs test and gotten different results at different times, like I have, it's very clear that context matters, and behaviorism really ruled out the context. While behaviorism did meet more of the scientific rigor and the standards that people really wanted in the psychology world, there were still major flaws. One of the names that you might recognize from behaviorism is B.F. Skinner. He kind of pulled some of his work from Pavlov, of Pavlov's dog's experiment, where Pavlov would ring a bell, give dogs food, and eventually if he'd ring a bell, the dog would still salivate even if there was no food there. Skinner kind of took it to the other side, whereas with the salivation, that's just a physical response. You can't really control that, it just happens. Skinner was more focused on operant conditioning, which is where you teach somebody that if they do one thing, then a different output will happen. So giving your kids chores in exchange for money, or telling yourself that if you work out, you can have that piece of cake later. Once you get that pattern and condition of, oh, if I do X, then Y will happen. That's like some of the operant conditioning that Skinner pushed for. So we've had introspection, we've had behaviorism, and we've had psychoanalysis. All of them are important, but all of them are flawed on their own. So cognitivism emerged as a theoretical shift, arguing that internal processes do matter to behavior. You might recognize the names Noam Chomsky or Aaron Beck. Beck was the founder of CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. which we can get into in a second. But cognitivism came around the same time that computers did. So it was trying to pull the same concept of computers into the realm of the mind. So how you could break it down is cognitivism looks at the brain as your hardware and your mind as the software. So your brain is the physical item there, but your thought processes, your experiences, your emotions, all of that are more of the software programs that are running on the hardware. It's not going to be a lasting theory. Everything always changes and evolves, but with neuroplasticity, it's been shown that your brain can and does change over time. So that would be like a computer's hardware changing itself. So the analogy doesn't fully stand the test of time, but for right now, it works for the most part. It is more practical and nuanced. It helps us break things down. Like in CBT, they look at what are you thinking, what are you feeling, and how are you acting? Like what are your behaviors? And in a very structured way, they will help people, especially with clinical diagnoses, get over some of these thoughts that are making their lives more difficult than they need to be. It's essentially a triad that if you think of the top of the triangle as being your thoughts and the other two corners being your actions and your feelings, if you start pulling at that thought corner, it will affect how you act and how you feel. So by getting the thoughts under control, you can start being more in control of your feelings and your actions. So cognitivism as a whole is really helpful at pulling everything together. Is it perfect? No, nothing is ever perfect. But it does look at it from a more holistic perspective that introspection, behaviorism, and psychoanalysis all did not. They were all a little bit piecemealed, and cognitivism looks at a broader picture. Another aspect of cognitivism that will tie into a future episode is around schema theory. Schemas are just your brain's image of what something should be. Your schema of a tree is that it's wood at the base, it has green leaves most of the year that then eventually turn colors and fall off. That is a tree. So if you see something with a pink base and blue leaves, that schema is broken. That's not what a tree is to you. That's a very simplistic, basic, throwaway example of what a schema is. But from a psychology perspective, people can have maladaptive schemas as well. Maladaptive being it does not serve you. So somebody who says, I am no good. I am not a good person. That is a thought. That is a schema. And it's almost like a software program that's been plugged into their brain saying, this is how you're going to operate. This is what you're going to think. And it's going to drive what you do and how you feel. Just like if you get a brand new laptop, there's always software that built into your laptop that you're like, I don't want this here. This is just taking up space. And maybe you can delete it and just get rid of it. Other times you can't unless you hack your own computer. Some of them are really hard to get rid of. Others you can download from online. You can always be replacing the software, upgrading the software. And that's the point of schema therapy, especially, is trying to override those maladaptive schemas and replace them with new schemas that are more productive and suit you better at this phase in life. We'll talk about it more in a future episode, but that is a part of cognitivism and the analogy between your mind being your software and your brain being your hardware. So overall, we had the 4 different main modalities. There's lots more. There's evolutionary psychology, there's positive psychology, there's humanistic psychology. There's a plethora that branch out past those 4, but those are foundational ones to understand. And when it comes to the Enneagram, as we mentioned, the Enneagram is much closer aligned to the ones that you can't quantify. It's aligned to introspection and psychoanalysis, but not behaviorism. Things like Myers-Briggs or the Big Five, for example. Those are other personality structures and frameworks that could be studied from a behavioral perspective. You can look at somebody and take a judgment call of are they extroverted or are they introverted? The problem is that we can all be extroverted or introverted at the right time. It's where you draw your energy from. And people can be acting out and being the life of the party, but then they could get home and completely crash and completely lose all of their energy and need multiple days to recover. So if you're observing them, you might say, wow, that's the most extroverted person I've ever seen. But that's not actually what's going on inside of them. And that's where behaviorism falls short and where I personally have a struggle with using tools like Myers-Briggs for any sort of psychological research, is that it just seems more behavioral in nature. and seems to miss out on a lot of the nuance and the cool stuff that makes humans our messy human selves, which unfortunately begs the question of whether or not the Enneagram can even be scientifically studied from a quantitative perspective. My inkling is no, not in the current state of things. We don't have the right tool sets. We don't have a test of sorts that can be verifiable because, again, you're relying on an unreliable narrator. Enneagram may be stuck in the qualitative realm for the rest of time. I'm not saying that's actually the case. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I love data and I would love to have more data on the Enneagram, but maybe we as a community can work together and figure out a better way to study this with numbers, or we can all agree that our narrative experience with the Enneagram is enough. But until then, we're going to keep looking at the science. We're going to keep diving into the data that does exist and trying to gather more as we can to better understand the picture at large. Thank you for joining me today on the Scientific Enneagram podcast. If you have any corrections or follow-up questions or ideas for future episodes, email me at hello@scientificenneagram.com, or you can send me a direct message on Instagram at Scientific Enneagram. Thanks so much for joining me. Don't forget to stay curious and have a relentless pursuit of nuance.